Today, my guests and I discuss the Journal d'Indochine.
Welcome to DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show. Level up your RPG campaigns by filling yourself with stories and knowledge. Explore topics from archaeology to film history to writing to literature and much, much more. This is DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show.
Welcome to the show. My name is Matt, and I am your host. This is the podcast where we learn how to become better game masters and role players by filling ourselves with stories and knowledge. If you don't know who I am, my name is Matt Davids. I am the creator of the Books of Random Tables. It is a book series where I cover fantasy, science fiction, modern, cyberpunk, Wild West, and other settings so that game masters can cut down their prep time and introduce more randomness and variety at the table on the fly. You can check those out at dicegeeks.com, amazon.com, or drivethrurpg.com. Just search for Dice Geeks, all one word, or the Book of Random Tables, and I am sure you will find it. All right, guys, I have an awesome interview today. It was my privilege to welcome two guests on the show, so let's jump in. It is my pleasure today to speak to two guests. My first guest is Jesse Covner, one of the co-founders of the Sons of Singularity. And my other guest is Patrick Chandler, a writer and RPG game designer. Jesse and Patrick, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Jesse, why don't we start off with you? I like to ask my first-time guests, how were you first introduced to tabletop role-playing games?
I have this very vivid memory from when I was 10 at a sort of a summer beach camp, and my counselor was playing D&D on the beach with one other person and wouldn't let me play, but I saw it and instantly became extremely fascinated and sort of understood that this is what I need to do. He didn't let me play. I'm pretty sure he was playing the basic edition of D&D and with Keep on the Borderlands. After that, I was playing since I was fifth grade, went through the usual D&D, RuneQuest, Traveler, Gamma World, and then later on branch into other things.
Okay, very nice. Patrick, what about yourself?
Well, I mean, my story doesn't go back as far as Jesse's. I remember playing D&D casually in high school, and I mean the reason that I've been a gamer at heart my whole life, and I started out gaming. In elementary school playing Pokemon cards, which then turned into Magic the Gathering. And from there, those circles all seem to kind of travel amongst each other. So I dabbled a little bit in Dungeons and Dragons back in high school. And then eventually when I ended up moving overseas, where I lived in China for many years, that's where I really started getting into it a little bit more. So I found a good group of folks who were into the game and into Vampire and Cthulhu and D&D. So I ended up linking up with them, and from there just started writing and playing more and more.
Well, that's great. Is there a big RPG community in China?
It's getting bigger, I would say. I would certainly say it's getting bigger. I mean, the group that I was playing with, there was 5 or 6 regulars, and and then again, some people played D&D and some played Vampire and Cthulhu or any combination of different games. So it is growing, and it's growing amongst the local community as well too. So the community, the folks that I was gaming with were generally expatriates. So of course we're sort of bringing that gaming culture over there, I suppose, if I can say it like that. But it is spreading a bit more to local communities as well, which is nice to see. A buddy of ours organized a big gaming convention called ConCon. So that's been going on for a number of years and picked up steam, especially with the local communities as well too. So very, very strong community now, and it's continually growing. So it's nice to see.
just to add to what Patrick said, that buddy of his, I don't know, I'm not sure which buddy he was referring to, but Jason Sheets, my partner, was one of the founders of ConCon, and also several other people who have contributed to our projects were also involved with it. For example, Ben Sanders, some others anyway. My mind is not working anyway, so I'm not going to list off all the names. Zhang Hao. I don't know, Patrick, if you've met Zhang Hao. Do you know Zhang Hao?
I don't think I've met John Howe. The person I'm referring to is, of course, Dan Bass, who started ConCon. But
things now,
yeah.
So we were sort of involved with organizing a convention in Beijing, and I was at the first one when it was 40 people, and now there's several thousand, more than 1,000 people, and they're doing one in Beijing and one in Shanghai. This was actually part of my dream, is to, at the time, a naive dream, but to spread role-playing gaming throughout China.
Obviously I'd never been there and I don't know much about it. So it was interesting to learn about kind of the gaming scene over there. That's interesting. I'm also wondering, Jesse, you said you had started out with D&D, but then started branching out. Did you play for a long time before you ran a game, or did you become a game master pretty quickly?
I don't know. We're talking about something that's like ancient history from many decades in the past. I would say that I was first a player and dabbled with GMing for a while. Did it quite a few times. Was never as pro a GM as, for example, as my friends Jason and others and Francis. And I went through sort of a dark age period of 15 or more years, 20 years of not playing any role-playing games, and then restarted role-playing games when I was in China, and played D&D. Actually, that was the first time in 20 years I played D&D with Dan Bass, who was just mentioned, and Jason Sheets and others in a Dark Suns campaign. And we got into a PvP fight in that campaign. But I designed my own. I designed 2 RPG systems and GM'd extensively in the campaign that I wrote for those systems. So I would say that I have a lot of experience on both sides. Also, I'm often relegated to being the sub GM. When Jason and I play, I'm often I'm the assistant GM because we have large groups, and I take people on breakout sessions and stuff like that, especially when we're doing Trail of Horror campaigns and the party gets separated and then eaten,
It's good, Jesse, because I'm Jason's sub GM as well too. I remember he was like, Patrick, you're going to be co-GM for me. I was like, all right. For when we did Sassoon Files, we did a big playtesting session in Vancouver, and I had just finished going through all of the material, and he's like, okay, Patrick, you're co-GM. I was like, okay, it's very clear and this is a testament to Jason's ability as a GM, right? It's he's the master and I'm happy to be the co, as long as I'm kind of in the same realm. It's so it's a lot of fun working with Jason, especially.
So Jesse, do you have a piece of GM advice for the listeners out there?
Well, I'm terribly sorry. I don't. I'm not like IGM. I'm not like the I don't believe so highly of my GM skills that I could give advice to other people. I like the style of GMing that I, after my dark age period, and I've learned from my buddy Jason. I like the mix of being able to give players places where they can add to the lore and add to the settings and add to the meta narration, not just what their characters are doing, but narration outside of what their players are, but also providing places where we test the player's skill. I'm not a purist in any form in anything, so I believe in mixing up aspects of OSR and aspects of, let the players problem solve with aspects of narrative games, of allowing players to describe and add to the world settings outside of their characters' actions. And I like doing this in a way that in open worlds that have very discrete plot pivot points that are flexible but provide a story that keep on going. So I design campaigns. I have designed campaigns and design products, and then I do it for my friend who I feel is the best GM who I've ever known, and then we work together to modify it to sort of fit this style. And these are usually for more investigation and role-playing oriented games, and games that have moral dilemmas, and less about say dungeon crawl. But I do dungeon crawl too, and I am a little bit of a D&D player in my heart as well, and like just going out with a big sword and killing things.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think it is important for game masters to realize that their players are a powerful resource that can add to the game, and it increases their buy-in to the campaign and to the game if they're able to add to it here and there. And so what about you, Patrick? Would you have a piece of game master advice for somebody out there who's wanting to up their game, as it were?
Yeah, sure. And it's hard to follow because Jesse's advice was really great, actually. For me, it's give your players as much autonomy as you possibly can. And for me, that means when I'm developing a world or creating a world, I like to create wide open worlds. Right. I'm not a huge fan of linear stories that go in sort of one direction, and kind of you're going to go in a straight line to get to the end. I like giving players the autonomy and giving them all these options to do different things. So player autonomy, make sure that you're giving them the freedom to do whatever they want, of course, within character, right? You're role playing, so they should be at least trying to do it in character. Don't hesitate to remind them that. But at the end of the day, give them their freedom. And then the other thing is, like, let their characters die. Don't be afraid to have player characters die. Like, it's part of the game. It happens in fantasy settings and horror settings and things like that. And sometimes players might become attached to a character, but as a GM, you got to just say, look, sorry, characters sometimes bite the dust and pick up and move on. So that's kind of my advice for a GM.
Yeah, thank you for that. That was good. So Jesse, I had introduced you as the co-founder of the Sons of the Singularity. Could you tell us what the Sons of the Singularity is?
Well, we're an indie publisher. We formed because we have a lot of ideas for campaigns, and I have ideas for games I want to play, and we together have ideas for campaigns and stories and worlds we'd like to build for players. There are some things that are different about Sons of Singularity that I think that I wouldn't say known for, because I don't think that we're really known yet, but there are certain things that we try to do to set ourselves I don't want to say different because other people say everyone has their thing that are different, but there are certain things that are hallmarks of the company. One, in the things that we design, we try to go for a certain amount of genuineness. We with Singularity, with the Sassoon Files, with Journal de Indochine, we want to go with. It's difficult to describe this. What I'm trying to say is genuine. We're trying to be realistic and approach the material with open eyes and not fall on conventions, I would say. We do that also with our fantasy products, with Rational Magic, which is in a sort of a high fantasy setting. A high fantasy, I call it post-fantasy, or sometimes dystopian fantasy. And we did this also with Camlin, which was a nostalgia play. The Camlin Chronicles is something we published, which was a nostalgia play taking place in Welsh Arthurian England. We approach all of them with a different and unique style. There is another thing that we do mechanically in our rules, something that we incorporate in everything. It's sort of like the rule set, the system agnostic rule set that we carry across the board, which is lore sheets. We believe that we create these handouts basically, and we put them in the columns. And so instead of having the GM have to narrate things about the setting, we provide a lot of handouts, and we provide a tool for GMs to create the handouts and allow players to create their own handouts. These lore sheets will tie character backgrounds into the story. They'll help define things that are in the settings. And depending on the game, they can give certain mechanical advantages. The reason why I got this idea from a game called Legends of the Ulin that was published by EOS Press. But the reason why that we use this and we believe in it is because our settings are not necessarily bog standard. And there's nothing wrong with a bog standard setting. There's nothing wrong with generic D&D. But 1920s Shanghai, a lot of people have no idea about 1920s Shanghai. Rational Magic takes place in a world where magic technology is commodified. Camlin, which is Arthurian, but takes place in a Welsh setting, and Journal de Indochine in 1920s to 1945 Vietnam. It's difficult to get players up to speed, and it's not just in these settings, but in general, whenever someone wants to create something that isn't copied from an existing or borrowed from an existing IP, it's a pretty difficult sell for the GM. They have to explain, how is this world different? They have to do that with actions and with monsters, but also with dialogue, and a lot of it's a difficult challenge. And so we believe in creating handouts that both GMs and players and designers can use to tie characters with specific setting details, and that way help get the players into an unfamiliar and new setting. Oh, that was a really rambling answer. I hope that they came across clearly.
No, that was fantastic. There are a couple of things I would like to follow up on. First off, it is interesting how you say that your lore sheets help people get up to speed, because I think that can be a stumbling block for a number of game masters when they bring something kind of new to the table that players aren't familiar with. Starting a Star Wars game or a Star Trek game or something like that would be fairly easy. But if you bring something like you said, 1920s Shanghai to the table, you're going to have to catch them up to speed. So that is interesting how you were saying that your lore sheets do that. So I like to hear that designers and writers are thinking about helping people get up to speed like that.
Well, yeah. Also, I've sort of this is beyond role playing games, but I'm a little bit depressed how I feel like a lot of the stories that we tell are, just sort of, rehashed of, it's always a sequel. It's always the Marvel. It's always Star Wars. It's always like that package thing. And there's not a lot of new stories that come out for various reasons, in movies, but in other ways too. And role-playing games are great for creating new stories, but and creating, but they often use settings that come from something else. The settings, as you said, Star Wars, or settings that are just sort of generic. Okay, generic fantasy world. And there are a lot of aspiring game designers and campaign designers that want to create their own, that get into it not because they're into a rule, wanting to create new rules, but they get into it because they have an idea for a unique fantasy setting, and they have a difficulty in communicating this, and it becomes long exposition and long stories, and it could sound like the GM is talking too much. So that was why I was interested in this.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good point right there, that most people who want to design a game, or most people that I talk to, they will start talking about their setting before they're talking about mechanics or rules or anything like that. They just wanted to play in kind of this interesting, fascinating world, and that's what's leading them kind of to do some of the things that they're doing. So that's, again, that was interesting to hear you mention that. Before I move on to Patrick really quick, Jesse, you mentioned post-fantasy. Could you just kind of define that? What do you mean by post-fantasy?
Well, I wasn't expecting to have to define it. Let me think that. Well,
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I mean, we have this. It started off. The idea for Rational Magic was the second book, but the book that I worked on the longest was came across because I was on a train next to Jason. He was complaining that in Beijing, where we were, everyone just wants to play D&D, and he was sick of playing D&D. And so I thought about, and we were both reading Altered Carbon series by Richard K. Morgan, and I was thinking, why don't we do something that's like disguise D&D as disguised science fiction concepts within fantasy. And so I started working on that. I started looking at finding other things such as Tippyverse, which is this idea of taking D&D and extrapolating to what it would really be like in the world with teleportation and the spell, and what would a D&D world really look like if it was made more realistic but with the same spell list. And then I took that further and said, no, it wouldn't actually develop that way because of, there would have to be certain changes. And I started looking at it from a more anthropological look at it and looking at religion. And I thought, what if magic was real and like there were wizards and stuff and all over, and it would become commodified, and resurrection spells would be the most sought after service. And after that, after resurrection, teleportation would be a big commodity. And there'd be factories churning out +1 swords and things like this. And so I wanted to create a D&D world if D&D was realistic. Not talking about combat realistic, but realistic and how it would actually evolve and develop. And as I did this, I was after I started writing this, I saw Eberron, and that wasn't really exactly what I was looking for. But I started reading some books by Richard K. Morgan, his fantasy series. I read a web novel called "The Gods Are Bastards." I read also some of the Charles Stross, one of the books of the Charles Stross Laundry series. Which was sort of a riff on Red Storm Rising by Clancy, and it's sort of like this idea of what would happen if a realistic magic using elf army invaded England. And so from there, I sort of thought of this fantasy world that is detached from detached from D&D, detached from Lord of the Rings. What would fantasy look like if all the things in it were real, if it wasn't really fantasy? And really what I'm looking at is science fiction. And Call of Cthulhu is sort of like that. Not exactly, but it's magic, but it's not magic. It's science fiction, but it seems like magic. And that's where I was going for in Rational Magic.
Okay, no, that sounds fantastic. Thank you for explaining that. Well, now, Patrick, how did you become involved with the Sons of the Singularity?
Well, I mean, it all goes back, like I said, to connecting with to my time in China and being a part of the sort of the local expat role playing gang, if you will, and through again through a sort of mutual circle of friends, ending up coming together and working on various projects, which I mentioned was the first one was the Sassoon Files that the Sons did a few years back, about I think it was two years by now, and they came to me and they said, would you like to work on this project with us? Come on as an editor at first. I said, okay, let's do it. And after the Kickstarter, they ended up hitting one of their stretch goals, which was an add-on scenario. So myself and another writer, we took that on and we built an add-on scenario, which actually ended up using a number of elements from a vampire campaign that we had done years ago, not years ago, but a few years prior, which also took place in 1920s Shanghai, which I believe the genesis of that vampire campaign came out of this other writer previously having played the Sassoon Files in their beta original sort of versions. So it's kind of this just sort of soupy hodgepodge of gamers that have come together and ported one story into another story, into a different game, into eventually a finalized product. So when Journal d'Indochine was sort of pitched, this other writer, Francis Acqueron, who I've gone back many years with now in China, he came to me and he said, what about, and he in fact was the one who worked on Sassoon Files add-on. He said, Journal d'Indochine, it wasn't called that at the time. He said, French colonial era Vietnam, there's a lot going on there. It's a very intriguing time period. There's essentially a lot going on, and it's rarely done, and perhaps we could build a world out of that. So I said, okay, let's do it. Having previously worked with Jesse and Jason on Sassoon Files, we said, hey guys, are you interested? What about a team up, and maybe we could get this product produced and published. So that's kind of how. I know it's maybe a little bit more than you were looking for, but that's sort of the involvement to date and kind of the genesis of it, right? All really coming from mutual circle of friends and mutual community of us all kind of living in Asia around the same time.
I think that's good to hear. I think there are some people out there who may want to write for games or design games, and I think that's good to hear that it just can come from a group of friends who are playing games together. And that can be kind of the genesis for something like that. Now, before we move on and talk about Journal d'Indochine, which I am sure I'm mispronouncing, Jesse, one of your books was burned by the Chinese government. Isn't that correct? Can you tell us about that?
Okay, so technically it wasn't burned, but I said it was burned at first, but that was my misunderstanding. It was destroyed. It wasn't literally burned. But because my Chinese ability has sunken, and I had first misunderstood what he said. So it was the Sassoon Files that we're talking about. And we had Patrick just mentioned it was 2 years ago, and I think it was actually 1 year, a little bit more than a year ago this happened. When did all of this happen? I feel like it wasn't that long ago. I feel like it was yesterday.
I think it was March 2019, around that time period.
Yeah, so it was like basically a little bit more than a year ago when that happened. We had gotten everything made. It was our first Kickstarter. Everything great. Did a decent job in it. Got everything written. At that time, I think the Brother of Jesus that Patrick was writing in was almost finished as well. We got it printed. I got pictures and I had sourced the printer, and I was pretty good with the printer. I liked what their professionalism, and I was mainly talking with the printer's representative in Chinese. That's relevant to the whole burning thing. And he sent me a picture of the books on a packet, and so I was getting to the next phase that I was really worried about, which is shipping it out. Right. And worrying about, because I'm worrying about everything. I'm worrying about, is if I ship it out and the ship sinks, what's going to happen to my book? And how am I going to make my backers happy? And we'll have enough money to reprint it somewhere else, all that sort of stuff. And I remember, so about 12 hours, I saw the picture of the pallet of books in the morning. And then at night, I was at my night job. Is teaching at a TOEFL class. It's a test, English test. And I got a call from the guy, and he said that they were destroyed. But he said "xiao diao," which is in Chinese, which is destroyed or eliminated, and the word "xiao" sounds like the word "shao," which is sort of like to burn. And I thought that the factory was, or the place was burnt, like the whole that something burnt down. I was like, what? And then it didn't like occur to me until after everything. No, he said destroyed, not burnt. So what happened was my version of events. I'm going to give an amalgamated of my version of events. The Journal de Indochine, the Sassoon Files, has content that is relative to China, of course, and it includes pictures of Zhou Enlai, the premier of China, who is actually even a character in the book, and is a great and very fascinating guy. It has a fake recruitment poster for the People's Liberation Army fighting against Cthulhu mythos, done in the 1960s propaganda poster style. It has, so it has graphic images of tentacle beasts, in the same book where there's Zhou Enlai, and pictures of PLA people. There's also a big picture of protesters being shot at holding the flag of the Republic of China, which was the flag of China in 1930, but is also the flag of the Republic of China on Taiwan. So there are things in the book that could be objectionable that really aren't, but really don't paint the PRC or communists in a bad light at all, but could be objectionable if you don't, images that could be objectionable if you don't understand the context. That shouldn't have mattered because this was being published for export. And to my knowledge, in the past, things that are published by export, they don't need to have special permission from the Chinese government, and no one's going to even look at it. I think Playboy magazine, and pornography and Playboy are illegal in China, but I'm pretty sure that Playboy magazine is published in China. Is not published, is printed in China. But apparently, if the printer said that they were that the boss came down and out of his patriotic duty eliminated these images, these books, because he didn't want anti-China propaganda to exist in the world. That's what the printer said. And I'm not going to say that that's a lie or not, because the printer is allowed to his story, and I have no problem with the service that they provided. But the first story that I heard, which is a story that I believe, is that a government official came, saw it, and said, destroy it. And so they did. And after that happened, I was really, really upset. The printer returned the money and didn't make a fuss of it. So I'm not angry at them. But it showed that there are certain things that now, just got to be careful and can't print it in China. So I made a video. I said, this has been destroyed, and I was thankful that I got the money back, but I was like, oh God, now I have to find another printer, and the whole thing is going to be delayed. And I really, we are priding ourselves to this point of getting Kickstarters done mostly on time and getting the main, following the schedule that we tell to our backers. And I thought this was like a major mess up. So I announced, I made a video, reporters and people were calling me. We made a big deal of it at the time, but I haven't since then put stickers on the book or anything like burned in China or anything like that, because, I do want to sort of get past it, and it's okay to believe that it wasn't the government that did it. It was the printer in their patriotic duty, and there are people who worked on the book who live and work in China, and I don't particularly want this to get blown up more, so we haven't capitalized it. More than we did that. I did that video back then, but that's it. I'm not gonna go start harping on China anymore.
Patrick, how did it feel when you heard that books that you worked on were destroyed?
Well, I mean, I lived in China for many, many years, and my wife is Chinese, and two of my kids were born there. So I have. I like to think, a fairly strong understanding of China and what goes on there, and the lives that many people are living, and their sort of day to day. And to be honest, it didn't surprise me. It didn't surprise me when I first heard from through Jesse's video, or I think I got a text message, and then I checked out the video. And it really didn't surprise me, but I was like, oh, that's actually kind of cool. Burned in communist China. It kind of does have that element of, it's almost fantastical, right? It just has this feeling to it. And, but again, like I said, it didn't really surprise me because, they do things differently over there. I'm not going to get into sort of a right and wrong type of thing. They have their way of doing things, and we have our way of doing things. And we have to, if you look at it from different sides of things, like Jesse said, in the book, there's Zhou Enlai, and there's Sun Yat-sen, and the Kuomintang, and then there's tentacle beasts, right? So you can see how, in a different society, this would be interpreted as in a different way. So my surprise was I was not surprised. And, at the end of the day, I'm glad that, Jesse was able to overcome this speed bump, and the book did end up getting printed, and all went smoothly after that. And, lessons learned, right? Lessons learned. If you're going to produce, material that could be a little bit sensitive, make sure you know where you're getting that stuff printed. It's as easy as that, right? So it's not surprised, but glad it all worked out in the end.
Yeah, glad that you were able to work that out and get your backers their books and everything. So now, Jesse, and we mentioned it a few times, but your most recent product is the Journal d'Indochine. Can you tell us how that started coming about and why you wanted to kind of take on that project?
As Patrick said, there was a sort of a bunch of things that came together. There were some external factors as well. The excellent Fall of Delta Green had just been published, and we really look up to Ken Hite and Robin Laws. Jason introduced me to them. I've met them, of course. Everyone who's been to Gen Con has met them, but they had made that, and we had this. Frankie had a lot of content set in Vietnam, but it was for Vampire, and he's played that. I played that I played one of his Vietnam-oriented things. I don't remember what it was. I'm not even sure I played in it because it was all sort of like a blur out of exhaustion. But at the first ConCon, I remember sitting in a room with him and with a lot of theme music, and it was a very intense theme. But I don't think I was even a player there. So we wanted to create something that Frankie would be interested in. Francis, I'm sorry, Frankie. Call him France. If we sometimes call him Frankie, we wanted to create something that he'd be interested in, and that he has family connections to. We have a lot of people in our group, in our circle, that do business and travel to Vietnam a lot. We have Vietnamese friends, and so it sort of just came together from that. Like, yeah, let's do that. And we didn't want to do in Vietnam. The American War, as the Vietnamese call it, has been done in movies for a lot. It's been done in role playing games with the Fall of Delta Green. It just clicked to us. Oh, well, we could do something that's closer to the Sassoon Files era, so we could have the connection. There is the connection, of course, between Shanghai French concession and colonial Vietnam as well, and then we have like a lot of very interesting characters that history looks at as sort of controversial, like Ho Chi Minh. In the same way that Zhou Enlai history, a lot of Americans, communist leader, but actually really interesting and cool guy. Ho Chi Minh and Gap were very interesting and sort of cool guys in their ways, who did a lot of bad things too, but did a lot of great things and overcame great odds. So let's do something that's different, and that's where we went with it. And of course, but 1920s. Vietnam, 1920s Vietnam, even 1954 Vietnam. I bet most people in America don't know anything about, the French colonial Indochina. They don't know anything about Dien Bien Phu and the epic battle, one of the biggest, like, most epic battles of the 20th century in terms of what went down and how it all played out. But we're good at tackling things that people don't know about and teaching it and respecting the historical content. At least we were good with that in the Sassoon Files, and we want to be good with that in Journal d'Indochine as well.
Okay, fantastic. So, Patrick, the time period is 1920s to 1954 French Indochina.
So we're looking at that time period mainly, and starting to look a little bit of maybe a few time periods that sort of fall outside of that a little bit. But the main time period is the 1920s to the 1950s, which was we've done a lot of research and we found that those periods were the periods in time where there was really just so much going on. There was so much fermentation happening there, and from rubber plantations, which were almost like death camps and internment camps, to political turmoil. We really found it to be a very fascinating time. And as Jesse mentioned, it's something that's never really been done. Right, it doesn't really get touched on, especially not in the role playing sort of setting. So that's one of the main reasons why we picked that. And even before we started out sort of principal development, I went around and I asked people who were not necessarily gamers, and I said, what do you know about this time period? Like, what are your impressions of it? And it's a lot of blank faces. Like, I don't know, like, Vietnam War. I'm like, no. Like before that, what was going on there? Like, how much do you really know? And not a whole lot. So that's one of the reasons why we kind of landed on that. And we said, we can teach this, and we can, share this with people who maybe don't know a lot about it, and hopefully give them a chance to learn something and create a world where people can game and at the end of the day have a good time.
Can I butt in about something about teaching? If you don't mind.
Yeah.
Oh. There's I think it's called Studio 41, A41 or something like that. The A47 may get mixed up. I get proper names mixed up. There's a movie studio that does a lot of horror movies. That's pretty popular recently. And in horror movies in general, you see this trend of taking movies that otherwise would be sort of boring or depressing, like family drama, or movies about dependence, or movies about whatever, and sort of spicing them up and making them popular by adding a horror element to it. Well, that's sort of what we are trying to do with what we're trying to do with Sassoon Files and General de Indochine. There's nothing more horrible than the things that there's nothing in the Cthulhu mythos as written that is more horrible than what we actually happened during the early to mid 20th century in Asia, with the war and the exploitation that preceded that. But we are bringing these things to light and making it more palatable and enjoyable by adding a dark horror element, which, when you really think about it, is not as dark as the actual history that underlines it.
Very interesting way to think about that. Now, Jesse, the campaign is for Call of Cthulhu and Gumshoe, is that right?
No, Sassoon Files was.
Oh, I'm terribly sorry.
No, that's okay. Sassoon Files was. The Journal de Indochine at the moment is simply for Call of Cthulhu 7th edition. In the future, we don't have a concrete written out plan, but we are absolutely dedicated to the idea of making this for Gumshoe at a later point. But this product is not for Gumshoe.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. I'm sorry about that. So, Patrick, then on this project, what did you create, or what have you been creating for this?
So a few things. I'm writing one full scenario, which has turned out to be actually a fairly large scenario in the book in terms of perhaps words and page. There's a lot of material there. Of course, working on developing various factions and things of that nature. But in the scenario that I'm writing and working on, which is just about complete, as you'd see on our Kickstarter. This scenario is just about done. It takes place in 1926 on a rubber plantation in southern Vietnam, in the Cochinchina province, as it was known then. And it takes place on a rubber plantation. I won't go into too much detail, but rubber plantations at that time, they were dangerous. They were treacherous places. They were workers were exploited there. Deaths and bodily harm happened all the time. And they also happened to be sort of breeding grounds of revolution. in colonial era Vietnam, right? So, workers fed up with the treatment, they would begin uprising. Okay. It also looks at, the themes of colonialism, right? How you have colonial invaders coming in and basically just taking land, as they wished, divvying it up. Yeah, you're living on this land, great, but get the heck out of here. We're coming in and we're building a plantation, right? So it touches on a lot of these themes that are very, very sensitive, but in an attempt to do it in a way that is sensitive to the events that actually did happen. And then of course monsters. You can't have Call of Cthulhu without a few monsters thrown in there. So rubber plantation, monsters, and historical elements that that kind of tie it all nicely together, and I hope set the stage in terms of the future scenarios, the scenarios that come after it chronologically in the book. So in the book, this would be the scenario that's chronologically takes first, 1926, and hopefully it sets the stage for the events to come in the subsequent scenarios. So we're doing, we're putting a lot of time and effort into making sure that there are distinct connections. So for the GM that wants to do a one shot, they could take it, run the scenario on its own, and put it down afterwards. Or for the GM that wants to go, I'm going to do a full blown campaign over the next year and a half, they could go, okay, scenario 1, rubber plantation, and then start building that into the next scenario and the next scenario and the next scenario. So that's what I've been working on. And then of course, as we hit our stretch goals, I have other scenarios that I'm working on as well too. Scenario that looks like it's going to be taking place in Laos. So another area of colonial Vietnam. And as I mentioned, a scenario that might be falling outside of the 1920s to 1950s time period. So going back sort of to the beginning. So these are the pieces that I'm working on right now, and as you can imagine, it's taking a lot of time, but it's super, super fun and super enjoyable to be working on it. And we got a great team going, so I think everyone's going to be pretty happy with this when it's all said and done.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, go ahead. Patrick, do you want to know about? Do you want to mention about the player factions? Or about how they're used? I could talk about that. That's something.
Well, why don't you go ahead, Jesse? Yeah, for sure. Take it away.
Well, we also have player factions, which are basically, we have a default way of going through the scenario that is written in the scenario, but we have rules for changing the playthrough of a scenario by using a faction that the player can belong to. And so and not all player factions will be relevant to each of the scenarios. But for example, we have the French Foreign Legion, the French Secret Services. We have the
Bin Shuyen gangsters, the OSS.
Gangsters and the OSS. These are player factions. Each have their own lore sheets, each have their own hooks to create ideas to create further campaigns with. Each can also be used as a different starting point to the faction. So for example, if you're playing the Fertile Redlands scenario, which Patrick is working on, you could play the default. The GM could simultaneously have another table, another group that's playing it from another direction. Even conceivably have two groups from different factions meet up. So we're designing it with different player factions to give it more variety, more replayability too, and allow people to come at it from different angles. Yeah,
and these player factions are really key, and what makes them really really work really well is the lore sheets for these player factions, right? So instead of these, as Jesse mentioned, a GM going on a long exposition about the French Foreign Legion, you just go, look, here's a lore sheet. This is applicable to your character. This gives the player a bunch of background on the French Foreign Legion. It helps them develop their character a little bit more, and it provides them a relevant, bonus within the game. So the lore sheets are really, really key for building out these factions, right? So, I'm playing a gangster in 1926 Vietnam. Okay, well, what was that like, right? What would it have been like to be a gangster in 1920s Vietnam? As opposed to me, the GM, going, well, in 1920s, the gangsters, they did this, and listing off 15 different things. I could go, well, this kind of applies to your story. In your past life, perhaps you were an enforcer for this well-known gangster, and you did X, Y, and Z things, which are historically accurate. And, because of that, you now have this additional skill that you can give to your character. So that's kind of the idea there when we're building out these factions as well too, right? Making them relevant, and allowing GMs and players to come at the game from a bunch of different angles and incorporate different elements of this world that we didn't create the world, but this world we're creating within the world of 1920s to 50s colonial Indochina.
Okay, no, that sounds fantastic. Because I was going to ask, one of the questions I was going to ask was, what types of characters can the players be, and so that kind of fills in some details there.
So I'll just jump in. So we've play tested it a few times. I'm of the mindset of, and I mentioned this before, when you said what sort of advice, I like giving players the autonomy to build whichever characters they would like. So we've seen a very good variety of characters in our play tests. We've seen gangsters, we've seen Foreign Legion. We had in one time that I play tested it, we had an African hunter, a big game hunter who made his way to Indochina, which was a lot of fun as well too. So it certainly, we develop these player factions because they fit within the world, but players and GMs should not feel limited to those, is what I'm saying. You can, as long as it somewhat makes sense, I think you can, include it, right? Like having that freedom and that, creative license as a GM and as a player is important as well too.
I know that's always important for people when they're looking at a campaign or some type of setting, is what their players are going to be and what they can play as. But that is interesting that you created those factions, and then you can almost be kind of almost anything else that you want to be, as long as it kind of fits the time period in that.
Exactly.
So, Jesse, where can people find or get the Journal let me say that again, Journal d'Indochine?
I don't know if you're pronouncing it better or worse than how I'm pronouncing it. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. It's on Kickstarter right now. There's 10 days left. I don't know when this podcast is going to get published. Maybe it'll be much further out into the future. Yeah. But I imagine that let's say that it will be, if people are listening to this 5 months from now, then I imagine that they'd be able to buy it. Well, 5 months from now, they may not be able to get it yet because we've hit a lot of our stretch goals, and now we are doing an offset print of the main book plus an offset print of, not yet, but probably going to get to an offset print of the expansion book, which is shaping up to be equally sized full book. So we may not, finish this in 5 months as we originally planned. It may be a little bit later, but once it's published, then the the main books, the hard books, will be available on our website. Of course, Kickstarter backers will get theirs first, and the PDFs will all be available on DriveThruRPG.
Okay, and I will make sure that I put links to all of those if they are available. I will put links to those in the show notes for this episode at dicegeeks.com. And if they're not available at the time that this episode goes live, I will definitely make sure to link to the Sons of the Singularity website so that people can find out more and learn about it. I guess just right before we go, Patrick, what is one thing that you would want to make sure that a game master or a player out there needs to know about the Journal d'Indochine that you would want them to know?
Oh, wow. One thing that I would want them to know. I mean, that's a really tough question. I think, at the end of the day, like I want them to know that, we as a group of creators, we're working hard to do this, to create this, but create it in a respectful way and in a mindful way, because there's a lot of sensitive subject material in the book, and of course there are a lot of sensitive historic events that happened, and I want players to know that we're not taking light of any of this stuff. We're not fetishizing Asian cultures. We're not doing any of that. We are working to build this world, but build it in a respectful way, and in a way that's going to be, at the end of the day, fun for people to sit around the table and enjoy gaming at. So that would be the one thing I want people to be aware of.
Okay, thank you very much. So, Jesse and Patrick, I really thank you both for coming on the show today. It was really fun talking to you guys. So, just thank you so much for being willing to chat with me.
Awesome.
Matt,
thank you very much. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you. This is my first podcast ever, or first real sort of interview. So yeah, cool. And I will always remember this because this was my first.
You did a really good job, Jesse. I was like, oh, he's been doing this for years. That's okay. That was awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It was fantastic. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, guys, I really hope you enjoyed my conversation with Jesse and Patrick today. It was a ton of fun just talking to them about how they became more and more involved in the tabletop RPG community and then began creating tabletop role-playing games themselves. As I mentioned, if you want to check out the Journal d'Indochine and their other works, I have provided links in the show notes for this episode at dicegeeks.com. So please head over there and check out their work. Now, if you want some free stuff, head over to dicegeeks.com/free. You'll get 10 free dungeon maps. You'll never miss an episode of this show. And each and every Friday, you will get an email update from me on what is happening in the realm of existence that is Dice Geeks. Also, if you enjoy this show, and I really hope that you do, consider supporting it in some way. And that can be as simple as subscribing, rating, leaving a review, telling a friend about it, sharing it on social media. It could also involve supporting the show financially. If you are able, you could head over to patreon.com/dicegeeks and learn about how you can support the show there and join my other fantastic patrons. So I just wanted to thank you so much for listening. And until next time, keep gaming.